Hello, great to be with you. My name is Zoe. I grew up just underneath Peel Hill, so I did a quick nip up there this morning. And great to be back on my beautiful, blustery island. So thank you so much for having me and facilitating this really important discussion. 2 months old. 2 months old is the age of the youngest child that we've ever seen brought to safety. I'm part of this global organization called International Justice Mission, or IJM for short. And we believe that every child, no matter where they're from, should be free. Free from slavery, free from violent oppression. Because as we've heard this morning, today an estimated 50 million people are being held in modern slavery, exploited and forced to do things against their will. And 1 in 4 of these is a child. This is a global problem that takes many different forms, and new technology, meaning that it's constantly evolving and changing shape. And this afternoon, as we dive into the complexities of financial crime and the solutions for countering it, I wanted to take some time to just frame it in something of the why. Why do we do it? Why do we come to these conferences year on year? Why do we attempt to constantly innovate and improve how we counter financial crime? Let me tell you about a remarkable young woman that I met recently. This is her. Her name is Cassie. For security reasons, I can't show you her face. She walks into a room and she just radiates energy. She's bright, she's light. But as a young girl in the Philippines, Cassie experienced the unimaginable. Day after day, she was made to take off her clothes over live stream for men here in the West to watch. They would make financial transactions to the Philippines, and then they would direct and they would watch her live streamed sexual abuse via their phones, via their tablets, via their laptops. Yet Cassie's story is one that gives me great hope. And I think it's a really important one for us to be sharing. So we're going to watch this brief video now.
Imagine yourself at 12 years old. Do you remember your school uniform? Do you remember what you dreamed about as a child? All I wanted was to study, to write, to learn. Going to school was my dream. We didn't have much. I used to scavenge rubbish to swap for pens and paper. I wanted to achieve everything so I could give my parents everything. When I was 12, a family friend made my dream happen. He paid for me to go to a private school in Manila and drove us hours to get there. To me, Manila felt like America. At last, I had a school uniform. I was so happy and grateful. But I didn't know there would be a price for the kindness he showed me. After school, he abused me for men around the world to watch online. I had to perform in front of a webcam. If I didn't, he would hurt me. And in locker rooms around me, other younger children were made to do the same. I wanted to die. After 5 years, one Friday afternoon, I returned from school with the same fear as always. But instead, this time the police and Edger were there. At first, I was scared and confused. But slowly I began to realize that I was safe. It was finally over. Healing was difficult. It still hurts. But this I know. He stole my dignity, but he could never steal my hope. If that young girl who was so desperate to learn could see me now, she would be proud.
They stole my dignity, but they could never steal my hope. That still rings in my ears every time I hear it. One Friday afternoon, Cassie was found and freed by trained police, accompanied by IJM, and they also discovered 6 other young children, including a young baby. Suspects were arrested to protect even more children. And today, when I met her earlier this year in March, had the privilege of hosting her for some events in March, Cassie is remarkable, as you kind of saw from that glimpse on that Zoom camera at the end. She has a master's in hospitality. She dreams of being a chef. She's a global survivor leader and an advocate who is using her voice all over the world to shine a light on the online sexual abuse of children, referred to as OSEC, and to see an end to it. She's spoken in UK Parliament. She's helped shaping policy. You might see her on an upcoming BBC documentary early next year, and she's basically just passionate about helping build a world where children like her are protected. Because the reality is this is happening right now to thousands of children like Cassie, with the UK being the 3rd largest consumer of this live-streamed abuse. This is not a crime that simply lingers on the other side of the world. This is a crime that lingers in the technology that we use, on the phones that we scroll, the transactions that we enable. Content that is consumed in our towns, content that is consumed on our streets. And I believe that we have a really unique role here today in bringing an end to this crime for good. So IJM is a global organization working with local authorities in 18 different countries around the world to stop different forms of slavery and violence. And we do this by working with police to bring people to safety, and then working with social workers to support survivors with trauma-informed care. Then we work within the judicial system to hold perpetrators to account so others aren't exploited. And throughout this whole process, strengthening justice systems so that people can be protected in the first place. And what we've seen in community after community is that justice is possible. You will see that in your own work in different forms. We've seen slavery decrease by up to 86% in areas that we've worked. Remarkable, remarkable transformation, and I have great hope that we're going to see this same story unfold as we address the online sexual exploitation of children. So as we go on this journey together, looking at the unique role of the financial sector here in the Isle of Man in tackling OSEC, I'm going to introduce you to my colleague who is a renowned global leader in this space and in combating this crime, and has a lot more knowledge than I do, and that is John Tanagho. So technology permitting, John, are you with us?
I am. Good afternoon.
Great. Good to see you, John. I'll hand over to you.
Okay, thank you so much, Zoe. Well, good afternoon, everyone. It's really a pleasure to be with you, at least virtually, although I wish I was there with you in person, but maybe one day I'll be there. I just want to thank the organizers of this conference for this invitation. It's really my honor to get to share with you for the next 20 minutes or so about what can be done to address this crime of online sexual exploitation of children through the financial sector. I want to thank Zoe just for that amazing introduction and sharing the story of Cassie. I've been doing this work now for 10 years. And the first 7 years, I lived with my family in the Philippines, partnering very closely with the government to address this crime. And it is survivors like Cassie who really give me hope and continue to inspire me to do this work. And I know that we can achieve so much more together. So let's dive right in. As you heard from Zoe, the crime that we are talking about is really a combination of trafficking and online sexual exploitation of children. Essentially, there are traffickers, or sometimes called facilitators, in countries like the Philippines, and they are live streaming the sexual abuse of children to offenders around the world. The unique nature of this crime is that it is financially motivated. A lot of child sexual abuse and exploitation that happens around the world is not financially motivated, it's sexually motivated, but this is a financial crime. Zoe talked about the Philippines, but I want to share with you actually that the reality is that global law enforcement are saying that this crime of live streamed child sexual abuse for payment is growing globally. And I want to share with you a quote. I'm not going to put it up on the screen, but I'll just read it out. It says, this is from Europol's latest organized crime threat assessment. Live distance child abuse is a persistent threat where offenders watch child sexual abuse on demand with the support of one or more facilitators who perpetrate the abuse on the victim in exchange for payment. It stands out as the main form of commercial sexual exploitation of children and as a major source of child sexual abuse material production. So this is really a global crime, and I want to share a little bit with you about how it happens. So first, it starts with offenders. You've got, on one hand, the demand side offender. That's primarily a sexually motivated individual who wants to watch child sexual abuse material. They are connecting with a trafficker. Usually they're connecting on social media, on dating websites, on adult-themed websites such as cam-to-cam sites where adult women are selling cyber sex shows. So they connect there, and quickly the conversation moves to live stream child sexual abuse. So they move to some type of messaging platform. Oftentimes it's an end-to-end encrypted platform like WhatsApp or really Viber or any type of messaging app. And that's where they negotiate. That's where the offenders will say what they want to see done to the child in the live stream, and the trafficker will say how much money they are demanding to be paid. After they've negotiated, then they move to the payment. And oftentimes what we are seeing is international money remittance services being used. Just your traditional forms of services, just peer-to-peer financial transactions. We are also sometimes seeing digital payment providers. And more recently, we've seen a few cases with GCash, which is primarily a Philippine domestic digital payment service, but can also be used internationally. What happens then is the payment is made. And after the payment is made, that's when the children are abused on camera. And this is happening in video chat applications on the surface web. We're not talking about the dark web. We're talking about Microsoft Skype, WhatsApp, Telegram, Viber, Facebook Messenger, right? Just your average video chat, live streaming application. And that's where the abuse takes place. That's where Cassie was abused. That's where so many children are abused. But I want you to focus on that third column there, the money remittance, because none of this happens until the payment is made. This is a photo from one of the IJM-supported Philippine-led law enforcement operations into this crime. And as you can see, it happened during the pandemic, where we actually saw an increase in live stream child sexual abuse. I've been on dozens of these operations in my time in the Philippines, and it was very common to find a home littered with money transfer receipts, with cash, with various IDs of the individuals who would go and pick up the money from the money transfer agency. And the police would organize the money transfer receipts because, of course, they're now evidence. And you would see payments of $20, $30, $40, $100 from different senders from countries all over the world, primarily in the West. And we would always look at this and be like, "Oh my gosh, this is just so clearly suspicious transactions." If you look at the number of senders to the recipients, the small amounts of money, no relationship. And in a few minutes, I'll share with you some of the red flags or indicators that we have seen from our casework. And then I'm going to share some recommendations from survivor leaders in the Philippines. But it's all about the money when it comes to this crime. And so you might be wondering, well, how prevalent is this crime? 2 years ago, we launched a scale of harm prevalence research study in partnership with the UK University of Nottingham Rights Lab, because we wanted to measure the prevalence of this crime to really understand the scale of it, right? Because as you heard from Zoe, IJM is always focused on protecting people from violence. And so our end goal is to strengthen the justice system and the related systems around that, including child protection and the private sector, to reduce the prevalence of crime. And so we have to actually know what is the prevalence in the first place. And when we did this prevalence study, we didn't actually know what the number would be. But what I'm about to share with you actually shocked all of us. And what we learned is that nearly 500,000 Filipino children were trafficked to produce new child sexual exploitation material, including in live streams, in 2022 alone. And what we learned through the scale of harm study, which we conducted in partnership with survivor leaders, is that this crime is widespread, that it happens in rural communities, it happens in metropolitan urban centers, that it is so easy to commit because all it takes is a smartphone, a video chat app, and then walking down the street to any of the thousands of small money transfer branches around the country where individuals can receive money from individuals all over the world. And so this is now our laser focus, is how do we address this crime? And that's a lot of what I get to do and the team that I lead at IJM Center to End Online Sexual Exploitation of Children, is we get to engage globally. We get to have conversations with global tech and financial sector and global law enforcement about what can be done to address this crime, even outside of the Philippines. And Cassie is, as you heard, is an amazing survivor leader, and she's part of what's known as the Philippine Survivor Network. It's a network of about 100 survivors who are consulting with governments and the financial sector, who are advocating with members of parliament, who are speaking out in their communities and sharing not only their stories, but also their expertise. And I say expertise because no one knows more about this crime than the survivors, who were sitting there in front of the screen, who were sitting there next to their trafficker when they were communicating with the offenders, who saw the money transfer receipts come in. No one knows more about this crime than survivors. And so we did focus groups with survivors as part of the scale of harm. And I want to share with you some of the things that they said, in particular, in a moment, their recommendations. The first thing they said is, normalize silence prevents community reporting. This crime is so widespread in the community, you might wonder, why aren't people coming forward and reporting this to the police? Why aren't victims coming forward and reporting this, or neighbors? Well, there is this sense of normalization of this crime within the community, where it happens so often. It happens within homes, right? It's private. It oftentimes involves family members or close family friends. And so there's this sense of like, we shouldn't be reporting this to the police. Now, we are doing something to address that. In partnership with survivor leaders and local organizations, we are engaging in community engagement initiatives to change this societal norm and to try to generate community reports. In fact, I was in the Philippines just last month, and we had a national summit that we did in partnership with the Philippine government, and we launched a campaign to generate community awareness and community reporting. And none other than the president of the Philippines came to this national summit to speak out, to call for an end to this crime. The second thing that the survivors said is that financial motivators are behind this child sexual exploitation material production. What you have to understand is that 10, 20, 30, or 40 US dollars is a large amount of money in the Philippines. In 1 hour of live streaming the abuse of a child, a trafficker can earn what amounts to 2 or 3 or 4 days of wages. So it is incredibly lucrative, right? They can make a lot of money in a short amount of time. And so it all comes back to this financial motivation. But then what survivors told us is, look, survivor voice and consultation will open the door to trauma-informed responses. They said, actually, listen to what we have to say. And so we did. And now we're sharing it with the rest of the world. Now, I don't need to tell you, because you all already know this, that you know that it's critical for financial institutions to implement specific methodologies to monitor transactions in order to detect, suspicious payments for child sexual exploitation, right? We know, we have seen that detection and reporting is actually critical because actionable reports can lead to law enforcement identifying victims, identifying offenders. It can support their investigations. Financial intelligence is a critical means, even sometimes to initiate investigations. If there are suspicious activity reports that identify senders and recipients who law enforcement have not yet got on their radar, that can actually initiate a law enforcement investigation. And I have heard that you are in the process or have already launched a public-private partnership to share intelligence, share signals, share reports to help identify offenders. And survivors were very clear that that is critical, right? They don't understand how they could go on being abused for years when these suspicious payments continue to be made. How did law enforcement not know about this? So it's critical that these reports are made in a timely way and that the intelligence makes its way into the hands of law enforcement. But that's not all, because you see, this crime continues to happen. And in fact, IJM has been part of supporting law enforcement in bringing to safety over 1,300 victims and at-risk individuals of this crime. So what that tells us is that detection and reporting is actually not enough by itself. And in our report of the scale of harm study, this was actually one of the recommendations we put in there directly because of survivors. They said it's critical that the financial sector expedite detection and reporting, and also the blocking or interdicting of suspicious financial transactions. So one, it's this idea of expediting, elevating the priority within your institutions. Child sexual exploitation payments should be elevated because the sending of the money actually happens before the abuse. This is a crime that hasn't actually yet happened, right? Which makes it a little bit different from other financial transactions that are suspicious for money laundering or other forms of crime. And so this is one of their recommendations. Actually, this is what I want to focus in on today. I want to share with you a few of the indicators that we have identified through all the hundreds of cases that IJM has worked on. And some of these may be familiar to you, but nonetheless, I just want to share them to validate them because they come from our casework on the ground. The first is one-to-many, one sender who is sending payments to multiple or even dozens of individuals in a source or supply side country like the Philippines, right? We know that individual sex offenders are sourcing live stream child sexual abuse from multiple traffickers. Maybe some of them have access to boys, others have access to girls, others are willing to involve multiple children in the abuse. There are different reasons why, but if you have one individual who's sending money to multiple recipients, that is a red flag. That is an indicator. The other one is many to one, right? Where you have many senders and you identify that there's a single recipient who's receiving money from 5, 6, 10 individuals. Again, why would this be happening? Because these traffickers, right, they are selling the abuse to multiple buyers. They're connecting through word of mouth, they're identifying multiple customers, and they're selling it to them because they're trying to make money, right? So they don't just want to sell it to one customer, but they want to sell to dozens of customers. So that's another indicator. Then the next one is multiple international money transfers in amounts ranging from 10 to 500 USD without a discernible pattern. Now, these are generally speaking, the amounts of money, except one pattern that you might see increasing is that the payments might slowly increase over time. And that is because the abuse is escalating. And this actually comes from our casework, but it also comes from the Australian Institute of Criminology, which analyzed money transfers of convicted Australian offenders for live streamed abuse, and they identified this pattern. Now, I say without a discernible pattern because what I mean is it's not $300 sent on the first of the month, because that would look more like money remittance coming from an overseas Filipino worker who's sending money to their family. No, we're talking about money that is sent on a Monday, and then 2 weeks later on a Sunday, and then 3 days later on a Wednesday, right? It doesn't fit a traditional pattern of a legitimate payment transfer. I won't go in detail with all of these. We actually, Zoe can share with you our white paper, which has all of our live streaming indicators in them. But two other ones that I want to share is there are no legitimate links between the counterparties, like a common family name, employer, employee, and that the payments might come through what is primarily a domestic digital service such as Gcash. All of these indicators we validated with survivors. We had them review them. But this one, 1.8, came directly from a survivor consultant herself. And so we wanted to make sure we shared that with you. Now, you might be curious, why such a broad range in the amounts of money, right? Why anywhere between $10 to $500? And this is a direct quote from the Scale of Harm study from survivors. And what they said is that the transaction amount depends on the request of the foreign sex offender. What particular sex acts are they demanding? And how many children are involved? The more children involved, the more egregious the sex acts, the higher the payment will be. So just because you see something that's $300 or $400 or $500 and it doesn't fit the majority of payments, which most of them will be in the smaller range. But that doesn't mean that it's not a suspicious payment for child sexual exploitation. It might just be that it involves more children or that it's more egregious in the abuse. So now let me share what the survivors said in terms of their ultimate recommendation. Look, what the survivors said is all the payments come in before the abuse. And there was actually a study released in April of this year that iGEM participated in, where convicted traffickers were interviewed in prison. And they said they would receive the payment before they would provide the live streamed abuse. And so the ultimate thing that survivors say is that financial institutions should go beyond reporting to become inhospitable to the sending and receiving of transactions for live stream child sexual abuse. By going beyond submitting suspicious activity reports, institutions can maximize the unique opportunity to disrupt and prevent child sexual exploitation in the first place by interdicting payments through heightened scrutiny via enhanced due diligence. Ultimately, what the survivors said is, if the financial sector can detect these suspicious payments and submit reports, then if these payments continue to be made, why can't they block the payments? Why can't they stop them? Why can't they stop the payments? Because if you stop the payment, you prevent the abuse, right? And of course, this would have to be a standard that would become industry-wide, so that offenders couldn't just hop from one platform to another. But this is what they said. This is their main recommendation, right? That interdiction should become the goal. That financial institutions should treat child exploitation payments more like terrorist financing or fraud, by striving to address them as soon as possible, submitting the reports as soon as possible, even reports of payments that were ultimately prevented or blocked because they were so suspicious, because we still want the intelligence to make its way to law enforcement. These are the QR codes for the scale of harm report, which I want you to know that you'll have that. But I want to share a little bit more about this before I wrap up. So that recommendation might sound a bit extreme. And I've had some conversations where individuals said, yeah, but how can we just block the payments? We don't actually know for sure that they are for child exploitation. That's why we're just submitting reports. But here's what I would say to you. Precedent in the financial sector exists in the arena of fraud prevention. Globally, fraud prevention methodologies apply friction to protect customers. Financial institutions can extend those practices to interdict possible child exploitation payments, thereby reinforcing their commitment to societal safety and ethical banking. Look, we have all had our bank or our credit card company decline transactions specifically because they looked suspicious or out of place. Why isn't the same benefit afforded to protecting children from potential sexual abuse and exploitation? I described in the slides, a few slides ago, the most common pattern or set of indicators: frequent, low-value, international peer-to-peer payments from one sender to many, or from many senders to one recipient. I would say that that these are all suspicious payments, right? And so I think that the suspicious payments should not only trigger reports, but they should trigger enhanced scrutiny, enhanced due diligence, right? Banks and money service institutions can actually follow up with these attempted payments and seek additional information to try to substantiate what is the relationship between the sender and the recipient. What is the purpose of the payment? By doing all of this, financial institutions make their payment services and their platforms safer by design. And safety by design is a big buzzword these days when it comes to the tech sector. I think it must also become a focus within the fintech sector as well. We all need to make it harder for child sexual exploitation consumers and providers to transact in the first place. So those are my recommendations. I want to end with a promising project that is going on right now. It's called Project Lantern. This is a signal and intelligence sharing project between tech and financial institutions that is run by the Technology Coalition. Currently, there are two financial institutions participating in it: Western Union and Block. And they're in this project in partnership with companies like Meta, Yahoo, Google, Zoom, and Snap. Now, just as you engage in public-private partnerships, also consider exploring cross-sector private collaboration to share signals and other intelligence to improve detection of suspicious transactions and bad actors. As you saw from my slide very early on, this abuse happens in a continuum. It moves from social media to messaging apps to payment platforms, then to video chat or live streaming apps. Signal sharing, sharing of intelligence among the tech and financial sector is another way to help identify this crime. Well, that's all that I have for you. Thank you so much for your attention. I hope you can scan one of these QR codes and read more about the scale of harm. I really appreciate your attention to this important issue, and I hope you have a wonderful rest of the day. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, John. It's a lot, isn't it? There is great challenge, but I hope that you get a glimpse that there's also great hope. As I round up this session now, I want to just take a moment to thank each of you for all that you do across this sector. I know that it's courageous, and I know that it's not easy work, but you are part of helping build a better world for your children, a better world for girls like Cassie. And as we continue this journey through this conference, I hope that you can just hold tightly to the fact that what you do really, really matters, and that freedom and justice is not only possible, but it's happening. So thank you so much for your part in this story. Thank you.